Hello allihop, or hello everyone. Today I'm talking about Sweden, because today is actually Sweden's 500-year-old birthday. So I want to do a history video here. There'll be no jokes here, all serious stuff. And my grandfather was the professor of history and math, right? So I was really taught a lot about the history of Sweden and Europe in general growing up. I used to live with my grandparents on this I guess you call it like a vacation island between like Norway and Sweden. So both my grandparents were teachers, professor, and my grandma was a teacher in French, so on, language teacher, right? Told me all about history, about the course and Gustaf Vasa. So I'm gonna go over a bunch of stuff here. Hope you guys like it. So subscribe, slap button, right? If you want to see more historical videos or math or whatever, right? I'm your guy, you know. So I'm also a history buff. I guess I blame my grandpa for that. But I also, you know, I studied history, right? I'm obviously, you know, I like anime and so on, right? So when I was like 12, 13 or whatever, I got into studying a lot of Japanese history, right? So I was very interested in, you know, Tokugawa period, Sengoku period and so on. So I know a lot about Japanese history as well, right? And also I also loved yokais, you know, and not just yokai, but also mythology, you know, Norse myths, Greek myths and so on, right? But anyway, I digress. Let's talk about Sweden, but I'm gonna go over the whole way, right? I'm talking about Gustaf Vasa, which is then the founding father of Sweden, and he's basically is George Washington. I used to call him George Washington of Sweden, right? I think it's easy way to understand it in an American kind of global English context is that Gustaf Vasa is kind of like the Swedish version of George Washington. That's probably the best comparison. So the backstory, to give a brief backstory, and then we go into all the different historical details. The backstory, right, is that Sweden and Denmark were in a union, which is called the Kalmar Union, a personal marriage and union thing, right? Note, of course, that Norway didn't exist, neither did Finland, right? These two countries are part of Denmark and Sweden. Iceland also part, of course, of Denmark, so on, and still is Greenland, is part of Denmark. And then they have what's called like Färöarna and blah blah and so on. Right? All this was basically the same union then, right? But the Danish people weren't very nice to the Swedes, right? So they killed everyone in Sweden. So this story is kind of ripped, okay? Like seriously, basically the short summary of the modern Sweden is that Kalmar Union exists, right? Sweden, Denmark is the same country, and they also control Finland, Norway, and so on. The Danish king, Christian II, is called Christian the Tyrant in Swedish. He kills every noble in Sweden, basically. He like executes everyone to control the nobles, right? Except then Gustaf Vasa. Gustaf Vasa becomes the only basically noble left is alive. He goes to like Germany and gets all the German Landsknecht, and he goes back and it's a rebellion and they kill everyone, and it's this huge. So actually the birth of Sweden, modern Sweden, is very bloody. Basically it's called Stockholm's Bloodbath and so on. So let's go into it. Let's have a short summary. Yeah, Stockholm's Bloodbath is called. Yeah, the Bloodbath of Stockholm. It's a notorious, massive thing. But anyway, I want to go then from the beginning here. So give me a brief explanation, right? When we say modern Sweden, and we'll say the birthday of Sweden, right? Because today, then again, it's 500 years ago, Gustaf Vasa became the king, right? Which is basically the independence of Sweden from the Kalmar Union, which meant that Sweden and Finland kind of left the Kalmar Union, right? And then Sweden is, of course, 500 years old, because today is Swedish National Day, which is an easy day to remember, because it's the 6th of the 6th, right? So easy to remember. But anyway, let's first start a little bit before that, right? Because obviously we have Vikings. Yesterday I did a video about Vinland Saga, right? So obviously, you know, we have Vikings. Sweden exists before this thing, right? But again, the thing is that basically after the Viking period, right, we had the Kalmar Union, and then we had, you know, kind of the independence, right, from Denmark. That's kind of where we see it as modern Sweden. But let's start briefly here discussing the Vikings version, right? So we had Vikings from about 800 after Christ, so it's the 9th century. You know, the Vikings, of course, of Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, and so on, you know, attacked England. They conquered Normandy, right? They became the Viking conqueror, etc. And the Vikings then stopped being kind of like raider and pillagers, because mostly it's Christianity, right? It's kind of an introduction of Christianity to the Vikings that is the biggest point. It's other points too. One reason why is because the Vikings also trade a lot. the Vikings didn't just kill everyone, they also traded very, very much. Commercial, they were very commercial based, right? Very economic culture. And the Vikings usually weren't allowed to trade with the Englishmen unless if they had the same religion, right? So they kind of baptized and became Christians, mostly because like, it's when I betrayed, and they kind of faked it, But some of them actually kind of, took it seriously. It's kind of how it spread in the beginning. And then of course, the other European countries went up right to the north, and the missionaries, and eventually these missionaries, made people then, change over to Christianity, right? And obviously the Asgard faith, right, which is all about the war and killing and so on. It seems to be in the animes and the books or whatever, right? And a lot of Viking movies. But of course, Christianity is way more peaceful, right? So they kind of stopped this whole raiding and so on. And that kind of is the beginning of, I guess, Sweden and Denmark's medieval time, I guess we call it, right? So this is kind of around 13th century, roughly speaking. It's kind of the beginning of early medieval time, Dark Age of Sweden, right? And Norway and so on. And this then leads into that the Vikings basically, be a little more civilized, right? A little more peaceful times. Then they create the Kalmar Union, right? Kalmar Union. Kalmar then is a city in Sweden. Let's go to the map here. I'm going to show you guys. So Kalmar is, here we have Sweden. Kalmar, so the red pen here. We're going to draw a lot of this map, okay? So Kalmar is basically here. Okay, why is it black for? Sorry about that. Red is better. Yeah, so Kalmar is like here. Okay, here's Kalmar. So this is like, it's like here. This becomes the seat then of the whole Scandinavia, right? So at this time then, right, Kalmar Union, it's actually pretty massive, right? That's a pretty big empire. This is basically this region, right? If you ignore UK, this is kind of like the Kalmar Union, plus of course also this thing, and also kind of like the other shit up here, right? The islands up there and so on. So the Kalmar Union is kind of this, right? So actually, a pretty sizable pieces of land, right? Sweden later is going to have what's called the Swedish Empire. It's going to be created later. Swedish Empire is actually kind of like covering. Swedish Empire, it's also pretty big. It's basically like this kind of thing. This is kind of like Swedish Empire, which is going to come about 100 years after Gustav Vasa. It's kind of like this something. Talk about that later. But yeah, Swedish Empire is pretty massive. So after Gustav Vasa, then Gustaf II Adolf, he kind of conquered most of northern Germany and so on. So coming to that later. But so this is kind of like the Kalmar Union, right? But now the Danish people, right? And actually, let me go back and say this thing, right? We have these kings, right? Kings and queens and so on. But I think a lot of people misunderstand, especially I think a lot of movies like Braveheart and so on, right? Fakes this in that, the noble guys, they went down and just took your daughter and all that. But the actuality is that the nobles had a lot of power, right? And the king didn't have all the power. And this is called, of course, a feudal society. Japan also was a feudal society, right? For many hundred years. And it's mostly Europe and Japan that has a feudal system that are actually quite similar, right? So you have your vassal, and then you have different powers and so on. Of course, in Japanese, it's called a daimyo, right? You see a lot of like Naruto and so on. They have the daimyos, and they have different, the lord of this land or whatever, right? So it's actually very, very similar, right? They have other words for it in Japanese, but from like a structure system, it's very similar. Obviously, the samurai is the knight of Europe, right, and vice versa, right? So we see then a lot of similarities between from like a society structure, right? With other cultures, for example, American cultures, African cultures hasn't really had that like feudal system. There's been monarchs and so on, but they haven't really had this like systematic of I'm controlling this city and I'm giving you power and some blah blah so on. But anyway, what it means is that Sweden and Finland, right, has all these nobles, right? Adel, it's called adel in Swedish, okay? They have this thing called the adel, which of course I'm part of. This is a video. I do actually, my family do have a crest and so on. Yeah, I am like an old, Swedish. So I have this like family crest, and we have a little estate and stuff like that. But anyway, there's another video. So adel then, right? Riddare and so on. These people, right? Maybe it's pretty good. This basically this ideas there. Yeah, they're roughly controlling more or less what this blue thing is, because actually. You address it here, right? This part here, I don't care if this is all written in this map, I know, but this part here, kind of like, give me the spray can, okay? So you see here's Sweden now, right? Oh yeah, this is the wrong one. I want the spray can. I want to spray. Where's the spray can? There we go. So basically this part here, the blue thing here is actually Denmark. And it was still Denmark even after the Swedish revolution, the Kalmar Union's independence, right? And this is actually a piece of Roskilde. Treaty of Roskilde is the one when Sweden actually kind of gets the land it has right now, right? Because actually this part here is Bohuslän, this is Scania, Skåne, and so on, and this was still part of Denmark, even after the independence. Of course, Sweden also had Finland, though, but this is kind of when Sweden later on. But anyway, so Sweden is this part actually, roughly now, yeah. Sweden and Finland, don't actually have this part here. But anyway, my point is that the adel, right? Adeln, like Vasa then, and Sture and so on, they are controlling different regions, right? So it's a feudal society, right? It's like some guy he owns that part, some guys over here, some guys over here. You get my point. They had a different land masses each, right? So even if the Danish king is like Christian sitting down here, he's the Knut, right, of that time, he's like controlling this stuff, and he's a main leader of the Kalmar Union. These guys are quite independent, right? They can do they get their own taxes and they have their own autonomy and so on. They have to pay him money and so on, right? You know how it works, feudal system. But they're kind of getting kind of ruly. They want to have more independence, right? More autonomy. He's they don't think he gets much power, blah blah. So what this leads to then, what is called the Tycho Brahe-breven. So there was this Christian guy. We come into that. Also, one thing that's very important to Gustav Vasa is that thanks to Gustav Vasa, that Sweden isn't Catholic, basically. But also Tycho Brahe is part of this. Tycho Brahe then is like a bishop guy, and he is working for Christian then, Tyrant, and people want to kind of fire him, basically, right? So everyone that signed the letter to fire him basically gets killed, right? So it's kind of coming into this, but I'm almost jumping quickly here, but basically he's like a bishop, or whatever, religious leader in Sweden, right? That is on the Danish side. The Swedish adel wants to kick him, fire him, whatever, right? Because at this time you had the fyra stråarna. So during this is like medieval time or early Renaissance time, whatever Sweden, right? And generally Scandinavia, you have different, controlling parts, right? So you have adel, but you also have the priest. The priest have a lot of power, right? So he's one of the leaders priests, and he's on the Danish side, even though he's in Sweden, so they kind of want to fire him. This kind of comes me anyway. So Christian uses this thing that everyone's against him, they sign this letter, the Brahe-brevet, to kind of execute everyone. They kind of marked for traitors, right? So what it does, and this is kind of important here, which is called the Stockholm Bloodbath. This is very, very important here and probably is the biggest event in history of Sweden, right? So he basically gets everyone's families, all the daughter, the sons, the wives, basically kind of like the civilians of the nobles, right? So not like the young men out fighting in the wars, whatever. Kind of like, oh, I got your daughter here, and this thing somewhere, right? And now then he basically tricks everyone. He tricks all the nobles, right, to go to Stockholm, which of course is on the map here, right? Except, and this is what I think is a very important thing to understand here when it comes to history. Except, of course, Gustav Vasa. Gustav Vasa is like, those Danish guys, they're clearly lying to us, right? So he's a paranoid son of a bitch. He's like, I'm trying to get for. So Gustav Vasa is actually amazing. Come to Vasa soon now. Actually, Gustav Vasa is a goddamn freaking anime character, right? He is gonna outrun the Danish people in skiing. He's gonna betray everyone. He's like an anime character. Silly. Gustav Vasa is like an anime character. So Gustav Vasa now then, right? He's just like, I don't trust the dead people for a second, right? They put him out. He's like a freaking main character, man. So every older noble, right? They go to Stockholm and they all get killed. Okay, this is called again Stockholm's Bloodbath, an incredibly famous event in Sweden and Denmark and so on. The Danish kings, he kills everyone, all the nobles executed, more or less. However, Gustav Vasa, the only guy being like, I don't trust the Danes. Yeah, he just go there. He escapes Sweden. So, first of all, this is kind of how Christian, which is called Christian Tyrant, as it's called, this is how he sees his own fate, right? Because by killing all the nobles, yes, you get kind of controlling Sweden now, right? Because all the Swedish leaders are dead, except one of them, right? Gustav Vasa. So Vasa now has basically become the king, right? more or less, because you killed his father, his sibling, all the other cousins, every other noble family, right? He's the only noble guy left, more or less. There's some people, but he's like basically the only like de facto leader. So he also like unifies every peasant under Vasa because they have no one else to follow. So that is a massive blunder, because normally, right, in a feudal society, you have like, 30, 40 different nobles, right, controlling 40 different, counties, but they're all dead now. So you only have this guy left. So he's like, oh, I'm the king now, right? So Vasa survives, and then Gustav Vasa got freaking crazy advantage, man. This is called Vasaloppet, which they do every 1 year in Sweden, still to this day then. That comes from that Vasa was being hunted by the Danish soldiers, and he escaped them in like this marathon on skis, like an actual skiing adventure and so on. And he had to escape. He was captured more than once and escaped that. Somehow he managed to escape the tower, so kind of prison tower thing. He managed to go down to Germany and then recruit thousands of Landsknecht. So let's explain this. So back in history, right, you actually didn't have that big of an army per country. The whole like nationalistic, I have my massive army, mixed with the king, actually wasn't a big thing. That actually came way later. And in Sweden and Scandinavia speaking, the first king to have like a good national army, like trained, drilled army, is Gustaf's second Adolf, about 100 years after this, in 30-year-old war. So Vasa didn't have like his own army really, but he went down to Germany and he recruited all these mercs, right? They call them Landsknecht. It's very, very common in European time during this time frame, just like in Berserk, that you actually half the army is basically mercs, right? So you have a little bit of soldier corps with your king and whatever, then you basically hire guys to fight for you, right? And in Germany at this time, which is called Holy Roman Empire, controlled by Austria mostly. So Germany, right, was a bunch of small city-states basically, small little like dukes and so on. So they would like lend out their soldiers, right, to go and fight for like Sweden or Denmark, Russia, whatever, right? Because they were protected by the Austrian Holy Roman Empire control. This is very convoluted. Basically, there was like 40 different tiny German states, and they were very, very common then that they will hire out the soldiers, or people would just work as mercs by themselves, right, as like an occupation. So Gustav Vasa goes down, and he managed to recruit like a huge army of German soldiers, basically, right, to fight the Danish. So he didn't even have like a Swedish army. He actually fought them with a Danish. He fought the Danish with a German army, and this is also very, very important actually for European history. Is that Gustav Vasa also removed Catholicism from Sweden, basically removing religion from Sweden, makes it because he had to pay all these German soldiers, right? And he paid them by taking all the money from the church. Also, that's also the reason that Sweden is Protestantic, which is a big deal, because being Protestantic has meant for Sweden and Scandinavia and so on that you're more progressive, it's more trade, more tolerated. Basically, every country in Europe that became Protestantic had better technology, invention, and so on, more or less, okay, after this kind of called a league wars, right? And the whole reason Sweden then is part of the Protestantic League then, it's a court because Gustav II Adolf joined it, but most of them, because of Vasa actually making the country Protestantic. And again, he did it then because he didn't pay them, right? So after he became king, also this thing called Klockupproret, the church bell rebellion. Because basically one thing he did was that he took the land from all the priests, right, and made it to the state, so he could then sell it and make money, right? But he also took all the metals from the church bells, like the gold and iron and everything, and melted it down to pay the Germans. So that caused basically like a Christian revolt in Sweden, right? A bunch of course Christians got angry at him and tried to kind of take back the money or whatever from the churches, but then he killed them all basically. So let's comment that later. But it's important to also remember that he also like changed the religion of Sweden, right, by doing this. But anyway, back to the map then, right? So Gustav Vasa is down in Germany. This is down here. This is Germany, guys. I know if you're European, you're like, okay, what is this thing? This is Germany, this is Poland. But actually, I do this thing here, because here's Poland today and all this stuff, right? Whatever, this map here. But the truth is that Holy Roman Empire is much bigger than what Germany is today. So if you go on the map, Holy Roman Empire this time is basically something like this, like Holy Roman Empire is massive, okay? Holy Roman Empire, it goes down to like, well, I guess Italy is part of it too, so Shadow Empire have it later. I guess it's like something like this, okay? These countries were also part of it. And Poland part of it. Yeah, Budapest. Bremen is like down here. So Holy Roman Empire is something like this maybe? And during this time frame, okay? So the green thing here is one big country. Like seriously. Like you probably don't understand it now with history, but this is Holy Roman Empire, right? So they're controlled by Austria down here. And then they have a bunch of different, like a Hungary, but a bunch of different countries. There are German city-states, like part of this thing, right? So all these German small countries part of it. And then most of like Netherlands at that time was part of that as well. Before Habsburg, Spain, and so on. And, well, not Poland. Okay, not that much of Poland. It's more like... But Poland was much smaller because... why am I saying this thing? But basically, as a side note, this part here, right? This part here, basically, of Poland, right? This was German by that time because this part here is what Germany lost mostly after World War II. So this part here, this is called the German Exodus after World War II. They took this land and forced all these Germans here to move into Germany, after the World War II, the Hitler lost. But the reason is that one thing people forget probably is that you look at the map, you think, oh, Germany conquered Poland like in one day, but actually Germany was much bigger, before World War II, right? So Germany was something like this, Germany was much bigger when World War II started, So they kind of went in, so they didn't have to conquer that much land, in that time frame, And then you had, so it was much easier, for them to go in there. And they hit Russia, of course, which is like also not part of that. So the map was very different back in the day. So, but this is now in like 16th century. So then this part here, this was all the small states of Germany. This is Pommern and so on. They were all small little states. And this in here, this is Bremen. Bremen was a powerful country. In part of this is like Bremen. This is gonna be terrible. Yeah, this is Bremen. That's very powerful. But anyway, back to Vasa. So he gets all these guys, right? He recruits all these guys here. All these tiny, all these tiny countries here. Bunch of tiny countries here. They all join Vasa, right? So they now go up here and they go and fight. They go up here, right? To fight the Danish, right? Because no one likes the Danish, right? Yeah, they're the bad guys. Go and fight them, right? On the same time, what Christian the Tyrant has managed to do, which I think is very interesting because it's like a terrible plan, right? Is that if you kill the noble leader of, let's say, we're up here. So let's say we kill the noble leader of this region of Sweden. This is like, what is that? Like Luleå, something like that, whatever, Umeå. No one cares. If that leader is dead, right? Maybe no one actually cares because maybe there's a terrible duke, Maybe the Duke of Luleå was a bad guy. He was taking little girls or whatever, He was super evil. No one cared, right? So you kill that guy in the bloodbath. No one cared, right? But Dalarna, maybe they had Duchess, I don't know, Elisabeth. Maybe she was awesome, Maybe everyone loved her. She was a great leader, she was awesome and so on. So people are angry, right? That you killed their Duchess. And then you killed, someone down here, you killed this guy, you killed this guy, you killed this guy, you killed this guy. So, Christian the Tyrant made a massive blunder in history. I don't say it because it's Danish, but he's made a massive blunder. I find it interesting because by killing everyone in the Stockholm Bloodbath, he has kind of depraved the whole country of the leaders, right? Because end of the day, even you can be against monarchy or feudal. I mean, I won't say that monarchy and feudal system is very good, but generally speaking, right, they're still the leaders. At the current system of Sweden and Finland, you have the feudal system, right? So all the feudal guys and some ladies, but mostly guys, but there are some, Dutch whatever. Some ladies also have a power. Depends, But usually, if the husband is dead, the woman actually will, be controlled, right, until her son or whatever gets older, right? But basically, all these, monarchy, noble people, and so on, as they're all dead, no one is controlled. All these squares now are like, what happened to our leaders? We lost the Duchess, and this guy died, and her son is dead too. Like, who's gonna control us now? Right? Who's gonna, manage the admin stuff? It isn't just about being evil dude, being like, yeah, chill, It's also a lot about just basic admin stuff, right? Oh, should we build a dam over there, right? Should we construct like a new dock or something? Should we invest in commercial or whatever, right? This is stuff that these noble people are deciding, and they might suck at it, right? They might be terrible at it. To be fair, they might be terrible at it, but most of them aren't actually that bad. They're kind of like, average, right? You know what I mean? Most noble people back in those days weren't amazing, nor were they completely terrible people. they probably was doing their best, right, to control their region of the country, you know what I mean? So, but they're all dead now, right? So all these people in every square, right, every goddamn square, they're all like really just kind of confused yet speaking. They're like, who's gonna admin everything? Who's gonna decide who's gonna build the bridge, whatever, right? So they're all kind of annoyed, and some of these nobles are actually popular, right? They're actually pretty popular. So what happens is that Christian the Tyrant does one of the biggest blood in history, in my opinion, seriously. Because imagine this thing, right? When you have so many issues now, you're gonna have rebels, right? You're gonna have rebels. Every freaking square here are gonna have rebels because they're gonna be like, what happened to our duchess? You killed the priest. I like that, he's a good leader, They're all gonna be angry at you, right? Some might be like, oh, we hate that. Who cares? But most of them are gonna be angry. And now here comes suddenly, right? Vasa is back, basically, up and down here with all the German guys. And he has a few, of course, Swedish soldiers that has, joined in from, maybe they were hiding in places, and guerrilla warriors, Some people part of the Danish and the Norwegian part actually joins him. And, it's a classic, some people go back to him and so on, right? Generally speaking. So he has a little bit of army, actual trained soldiers from these different countries also joining him, of course. But also the German guys coming down here, right? Now, Christian the Tyrant is like, oh, I have to have, most of my army has to be down here. Take out the color. Most of his army has to be down here, right, to fight the Germans. Because they're coming here to Germany. So they're like, okay, they're here, okay. And then I need to send some army up here, and some army up here, and some army up here, some over here, and here. Yeah, my point. There was no way he could defend this thing. So while his, part of history, the Bloodbath, is an iconic and one of Europe's worst crime, basically. Like basically executing everyone from one country. There's a leader. Yeah, it's really famous. No one else in Europe, I think, has done a similar thing like the Bloodbath of Stockholm. That's like iconically one of the worst moves ever, like most brutal moves ever. But also it's really stupid, right? Because it made everyone hate him. So he can't send out his troops. He started to, I send 1,000 guys up here, 2,000 guys up here. Suddenly, like half your army is running around and Sweden and Finland is pretty big, yeah. Half your army is like running around this country. Here comes the German troops. Here comes the Swedish troops in here. Basically, they're fighting over here, and you're like, oh, great. Like, there's no way he can defend. Basically, there's no way he could, especially hold part of Finland, right? His army can't run to Finland, so all the rebels are gonna conquer all the cities in Finland, right? All the garrison troops, the food, whatever, right? So he can't control that, and so on, right? And if he started, the thing that when it comes to civilian rebellions in this time period, it's pretty easy, right, for the king to send his whole army. It's like, okay, let's go to Dalarna and kill everyone in Dalarna. It's easier, right, to crush them like that. But if your whole army has to go out there and do that, well, you lose Köpenhamn because here comes the Germans, right, you know what I mean? And if you send 10% of the troops up there, you probably only need like 10, maybe 20% of your full army, right, to go to one of the cities to care of it. But you can only do it like once per city, right, one army per city. Or whatever. So he's I don't know. The Bloodbath is interesting. He killed everyone, but by doing that, he sees on fate because he made Gustav Vasa become the only king, basically. The only guy that more or less could be king, right? More or less is the only person that could be, so to speak, the noble guy alive, right? And also made everyone hate him, right? And it's interesting because I thought it was a lot when it comes to noble stuff. Because, for example, if you go and kill like the noble leader of a certain region in this time frame, no one probably actually would have cared, because it's like, oh, you killed the leader that we didn't like anyway. Okay, we get a new guy we don't like anyway. Most peasants don't care that much, but they care a little bit, maybe. But they're more like, But if you do it in the whole country, I mean, he must have caused massive, administrative issues, right? Who's gonna be the boss? Who's the gas? Or so everyone's confused, right? It's a massive logistical issues, right? To kill, he killed several hundred people were executed in a few days there. He just kept killing everyone, right? So basically, imagine you go to a modern country today, right, and kill every major, I guess something like that, if you go to Sweden or whatever, right, and you will execute everyone that is the municipality, the county boss, the elder man, whatever, in every city, right? I mean, it's gonna be quite chaotic, right? And at the same time, the soldiers that might actually not be on the people's side, generally speaking, they're like Danish, Norwegian soldiers, they might be like, whatever, I don't care, just kill them. They're also like, who's our leader? He killed all the leaders, right? So he's like, who's our boss? Well, we don't have any boss anymore. You know what I mean? They're also like, we got this new guy coming here. Yeah, like, they're also gonna be kind of confused, right? So he managed to cause an absurd situation where he was impossible for him to control more or less any part of Sweden and Finland, and that's even without Vasa, right? But of course, the thing happened is, like in most history, right, when it comes to rebellions, like kind of like independence rebellions, is as soon as Vasa returns, right, with the became twice size of an army, right, because he doubled up his army with Germans. Suddenly, everyone is like over in Stockholm and all like, oh yeah, let's revolt now because he comes in with a huge army. We can all go get free now, right? Suddenly, it's gonna be like 500 rebels everywhere. Right? So it's a massive issue there. But he loses then. Sweden becomes free, right? And basically, Sweden and Finland becomes a new country. My map is the Viking Era, I don't care. And this then become Sweden and Finland, right? Like I said earlier, the blue thing is actually isn't part of this piece. So the new brown thing is basically the new country of Sweden, right? And that's what happened 500 years ago then. Gustav Vasa got coronated. Not actually this day. This is National Day, and I also would say it's wrong because I think they changed the calendar and the sun, whatever, blah blah. So I think, technically speaking, I think exactly 500 years ago is something like in 10 days from now or something, because how this thing is moving and this thing, and then the calendar swapped and we have recalculated. But the date, the national day is today, and this is the independence, right, of Sweden and Finland. And like I say briefly then, how happened to Finland then, right? So Finland was part of Sweden until the Russian guys. These guys over here, like over in my map, you might see this country over here. This is Russia, guys. Okay, for you Americans out there, this is Russia. Okay, this is Russia. They're pretty big, yeah. So Russia was pretty weak actually, right? Like I said briefly here. I say just briefly. If you like the video, subscribe, leave a comment below, right? What do you guys think? But the Russia video is basically its own video, right? The Finland and Russia. But very, very briefly, right? Where I'm from, right? You celebrate 17 May, which is the Norway Independence Day. That's a much bigger day, generally speaking. It was was it 100 years ago last year? Because Norway became independent from Sweden only like 101, 102 years ago. So it's very recent, right? And Finland, of course, got independent from Russia in 17, yeah, so 106 years ago. So both Finland and Norway are only actually 100 years old as their own countries, but Sweden is like 500 years old, right, from Denmark. So there actually is quite a difference thing there. And not only is it different, but like I said, in Norway, some people in Norway, right, since I'm like Swedish Norwegian, and in Norway, the National Day is a much bigger thing. And I think that is because it's a much, like a younger country. That's probably one of the reasons why. Because in Norway they celebrate like crazy on National Day. And in Sweden, I don't know, this year is probably a lot bigger because it's the 500 years. But normally in Sweden you don't really celebrate the National Day. But in Norway they celebrate it hard, okay? Very, very hard. Where I'm from is always massive parties, 17 May. Where Sweden is like, kind of whatever. It's just a little bit of Swedish culture, but still. But anyway, if you like the video, like, subscribe, and so on, and I can explain all that as well, right? I will. Another thing about is how Finland left Sweden and Russia and so on. But I give a very brief part of this here now because I want to explain how Sweden lost Finland though, because it's part of the whole story here, right? So what happened is that Russia, this big ass country to the right here, right, over me. This is Russia, guys. If you're American, this is the red guys, yeah, communist guys. Russia was actually quite weak back in the days. So when this thing is happening, because of Vasa, Russia is actually, they're pretty small, okay? So you get Novgorod, for that matter, which is up here, which is not part of Russia, right? There's another country. Russia is called Muscovy most of this time, and it's part there. And down here, where I'm covering with the camera, you have other countries that they are part of Russia. Now they are, of course, but at that time, a bunch of these countries, right, weren't actually part of Russia, right? So what happens is Russia grows quite big, right, over a course. I guess it starts around 16th century, 15th century, something like that. And in the 18th century, and this is also kind of definitely it's going to be by itself, but basically the Swedish Empire time, the end of Swedish Empire is very clear. It's basically when the Swedish Empire loses to Russia, right? And then and that's basically seen as the start of the Russian Empire instead. And then the Russian Empire, of course, takes Finland. So what happens in the 18th century with Karl II Adolf is that it's Karl the 12th. I mean, so what happens is that in the 18th century, I can say, with Karl the 12th, right? He loses against Peter the Great, and that really is then seen as kind of the end of the Empire of Sweden, beginning of Russian Empire, and so on. And that's kind of where St. Petersburg is named after, of course, Peter the Great. He's the one that founded the city, right? And it's very close to Finland and Sweden, right? Because he wanted to have Peter the Great wanted to create a harbor, right? And the big reason they're fighting Sweden is because they want to control more of the Baltic Ocean to trade and so on. Yeah, so Russia had a big issue. They couldn't really have any ships, right? So basically, Russia has my camera right there. The end of Swedish Empire is because, from a strategy standpoint, right? Russia has his Petersburg. This is what he created, and Peter the Great. But he really wanted to kind of take over this area because Russia wants to be able to trade, right? So before, Russia only had ships coming from here, right? So the Russians, they would kind of have to go like this, right? Into trade with Europe, which is super annoying, right? It's super far, very cold up here in the North Seas. So he wanted to have all the ships go this path in the middle, right? So the reason he's fighting the Swedish Empire is mostly he wants to conquer this red circle here. He wants to take over this thing. Sweden is controlling part of Germany and Finland and so on. He wants to conquer this part, Czechoslovakia and so on. But anyway, so what happens is that he conquers, he beats Sweden he actually loses first actually. So first Sweden actually wins. And then Karl XII has this legendary failure, which also Napoleon did that also. So he beats Russia actually. So Sweden actually wins in the beginning of the war. Yeah, they actually beat them really heavily. But then Karl XII, he runs to Moscow in the winter. He goes in here. If I move my camera again. Karl XII was the biggest, dumbest thing ever. He's the dumbest thing ever. He takes the whole army, runs around a bit like this, blah, 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 fight all the guys, and then he runs into the ice of Russia and dies with all the troops. Yeah, like straight up. So that's exactly like Napoleon did, like 100 years later. So I'm not even joking, man. It's so stupid. Yeah, they almost run into, the winter of Russia and die in the cold. It happens like 3 times with Russia. So he did that, right? And then Sweden lost the empire basically because Russia could then counterattack and take over Finland. And then Finland then lost, right, and become part of Russia. So what happened then is that I jump quickly here now then, and after this thing we go to World War One, right? So now I'm jumping like 200 years here. And in World War One, basically what happens is that I say it, we have the World War One, obviously, big thing, right? And then you have the Russian Revolution on the same time, right? 1917. So the World War One is 1914, 1918, but Russian Revolution with the Soviet Revolution, kind of communist revolution, the popular communism is 17. But anyway, so we're 17 then, right? When the Russians are having this revolution, the Finnish guys are like, okay, we can get independence. Yeah, they also have a revolution, but then of course that they're not revolutioning because they want to be communist, right? They just kicking out the Russians, right, from Finland. And because of what's his name, Tsar Nikolai II, he had troubles, right, with all the Russian communist revolts, right? He couldn't really, of course, control Finland. Similarly to kind of the map already here, right? He couldn't control all his rebels in Finland because his army was like fighting all the other rebels everywhere in Russia. Russia's a massive country, right? So his army is running around like fighting all the rebels everywhere, communists, right? And he can't focus on Finland. So Finland just gets free, kicks out the troops they have in Finland, right? And then he's like, oh shit, we can't take that back right now. And then the communist guys, because they had this communism is kind of like the people's power and this thing. They were like, I guess we like that, right? So the communist guys, they probably still wanted to have Finland part of the Soviet Union or whatever, right? But they were like, I guess we have to pretend to like that. So those rebels, basically the communist rebels, they were like, good job, Finnish guys, woo, people, So they actually agreed with them. They should be free then because they were like, yeah, that's right, done with the Tsar or something. So they didn't go actually back and try to fight the Finnish guys because they were like, okay, I guess we're on the same side, kinda, right? However, then of course, Soviet Union attacked Finland twice though, afterwards, yeah. But after they turned into a powerful, Soviet Union, and then they kind of stopped the rebels, then they started attacking Finland anyway. So they tried, but they called it Winter Wars. The Finnish-Russia Winter Wars, for like 1940s. But yeah, so they did it later in World War II as well. But, and actually, don't hate me here, Finnish guys, but I would say that Finland probably would be lost to Russia in World War II if it wasn't for the Germans, right? Because the Germans then, so Soviet Union attacked Finland during World War II to reconquer it, right? Because they don't want it to be free, right? So they want to go back to war. But on the same time, Germany, roughly the same time, Germany betrays Russia, right? And they had this called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Germany and Russia to have like not like a defensive pact, but basically a non-aggressive pact, Germany betrays them, because I guess you can't trust those German guys. You cannot trust the World War II German guys. Not very trustworthy, right? So they betray Russia and attacks them anyway. And that basically means that Russian troops can't go to Finland to fight, they can't get all the... So most of Russia is fighting Germany, right? They can't just go and fight the Finnish guys. So they had a war with Finland, but it probably... I think so. I think it's fair to say... Some Finnish guys say, no, we're the best, no. But I think it's fair to say that Finland would have lost Soviet Union easily if it wasn't for the Germans also fighting Russia at the same time. And then, of course, Russia had to focus on the Germans. They had a huge army, of course. They had to focus on that in Stalingrad and so on. Stalingrad, famous battle sword there. But that's kind of the Finnish independence. So Finland was independent a little more than 100 years ago. Almost lost it. Again, back to Soviet Union there, right? And that kind of created how Finland is. And in Finland they speak, Swedish and so on. Yeah, like when I used to work with a Finnish game studio, like 10 years ago, we had another studio. I was working in Sweden, we had another studio in Finland, owned by the same company. All my Finnish colleagues could speak Swedish, right? So they study Swedish in school and so on, and more or less every Finnish person I know are fluent in Swedish actually. But I am fluent. I actually can't speak Finnish at all, really. I can speak Danish and Norwegian fluently, right, and Swedish. So I can speak. Yeah, I can speak these things, right? Because I'm from, I'm like half Swede, half Norwegian, basically, right? I'm from here, so I can speak this stuff. Yeah, I'm from the blue region here, basically. yeah, exactly. So I can, so I'm kind of that, classic thing. And I say lastly, when it comes to language, for that matter, yeah, Swedish, Finnish, and Danish are very similar. But Finnish is a completely other language, right? It is a completely other historical language. The Finnish language comes from people that kind of moved like this, into Finland. Right? They kind of probably traveled like this right into Finland. That's kind of the language. They kind of comes from that, right? Or maybe maybe here from it. But whatever point, they moved like that, where the Swedish, Norwegian, Finnish, Danish guy. The other guys move like this, right? But there also are Finnish people that come in that way too. But anyway, the language is very different. Yeah, Finnish language is very, very different than the other three languages, and it's very hard to. They're not even comparable, I would say. It's completely different, honestly. Like I'm not very good in Finnish, but it feels like a very different language. But for example, English is very similar to Swedish, right? Or Norwegian, even more probably Norwegian, yeah. Finnish, not at all. Again, not at all. Yeah, it's like, for example, there's so many words are the same thing in English, and some of these words in English actually are, Norwegian and Danish words, right? So, for example, window, right? Window, so that's actually vindu, right? That's a word from Norwegian and Danish. It seems to be Vinland Saga, right? The Danish, called Danelag, right? The Vikings, after all, controlled basically this part of England, right? Kind of like this part here, maybe? Success and so on, so yeah, like that. They basically, this is kind of Danelag, This red circle here was kind of like controlled by the Vikings for a while. And then, of course, Normandy, which is here, Normandiet, this is also Vikings, William the Conqueror, that later turned into, and then went up here, right, in the Normanders. And they're also Vikings, right? The William the Conqueror is like the grandson or whatever of Vikings, so roughly, maybe it's whatever. So, basically, the point that a lot of the words in English, so it isn't necessarily, I think it's kind of funny, because I think people sometimes think that the Scandinavian language, right, like Norwegian or whatever, is similar to English because the influence of America or the British or whatever. I think a lot of people think that oh yeah, the same word in English and Norwegian because PC, pop culture, or whatever. But it's actually the opposite, right? I think the opposite. it's actually more so that the Vikings had such a big impact on the British Isles, right? You know, with all the war, conquering this part, going up here again, and so on. So actually it's more that thing, right? So actually a lot of the words that you have in English are actually from Scandinavia. That's actually probably how it is more actually, because that's actually more logical that like 1,000 years ago, the Viking impact was so massive that a lot of the words that the Viking used were, you know, got used in England and also in France, right? And then those words are kind of sticks like windu and other animals and so on. A bunch of stuff, right? Bunch of things. But I say it on the videos too, but a lot of words are very similar, mostly for animals and other elements and so on. They're very the basic stuff, like cat is cat, you know, hat is hat and so on. Hut, yeah. Also, a lot of nouns is the same thing, you know, like things that are. So that's probably a lot from the Vikings. Like, oh, this is what we call this thing. This is what we call, you know, sword and this thing, and a lot of that. A lot of animals' names, you know, the wolf, and so on. So a lot of that. That being said, obviously they're all Indo-Germanic tribes, right? And Germany is also quite similar language to Scandinavia. So, for example, in German, the word for black is schwarz and svart and so on, right, in Swedish. So it's kind of a lot of similarity to water is Wasser and vatten and so on. So you get a lot of similarities. So it's a language, yeah. But Finnish guys, the Finnish language is very different. It's something completely remote. I don't know. I have a lot of Swedish friends, but I can't understand a single word they say basically. It's a different language. There's like no correlation to that. It's like it's like completely different. It isn't built on anything, I think, at all. But every Finnish person I know, they speak Swedish fluently, and English usually, but and also English probably, but mostly Swedish, so you can talk to them like that instead. But anyway, I hope you liked the video. Subscribe to the like button, some history videos, right? I think it'd be fun talking about here. Gustav Vasa was such a badass too. Like he outrun the Rush. He did everything. He was fighting wars. And also, funnily, I didn't say this thing. I mentioned it briefly earlier, but also funny that Gustav Vasa, right? He freed the Swedes and he became this like great superhero of Sweden, right? And now he beat the Danish, beat them in skiing. He escaped prison like twice something. He did all these crazy deeds, right? And everyone's like, he's a freedom fighter, he's the best guy ever, and so on, right? But when he actually became the king, he actually was a pretty good king, arguably speaking. He was a pretty good monarch, and his sons became the kings, and the shit kind of worked, right? But he also had 3 massive revolutions against him. One of them then being the whole Christianity, Catholicism rebellion, right? And he killed everyone, right? And there was another rebellion about like peasant leave, tax, so he killed them too. So Dackeupproret, yeah. So I think it's kind of funny how Gustav Vasa, he's known as, again then the founding father of Sweden, kind of Sweden's vision of freedom fighter and so on, but he also killed basically everyone that was against him when he was king. So it's very classic, you become what you hate. So he's like this Danish guy, he kills everyone he doesn't like. This guy's so evil, man. I should be the king. Oh no, I am king. I kill everyone. So kind of like that. That being said, though, he didn't do the same thing. I mean, obviously Christian, he kind of lured everyone to Stockholm and killed them, right? They were just kind of against his opinion, or political guys he didn't like or whatever. He said crazy. Gustav Vasa was more like, oh, they're rebels, kill them. Yeah. He was more like, burn it all down. Yeah, he was more like Order 66. Yeah, he was more specific, like, this village is rebelling, destroy it. Yeah, he was like, nuke them now. Yeah, he was a little more like that, right? A little more controlled what he was aiming at. But it is kind of famous that for the first like 10 or 20 years or whatever, he's like, oh, he's like the super freedom fighter, like, oh yeah, super good guy. And then his last 10 years or whatever as a king was basically just quelling rebels that hated him for everything he's changed. But I still think it's very important because, not only because of course, independence of Sweden, right? But as I mentioned earlier, he also then made Sweden change religion, right? Or at least reformed Swedish religion. And that also led to, Scandinavia, generally speaking, also reforming to the same, right, Protestant religion. And for example, both Finland and Norway has been part of Sweden, right? So they're also the same, Protestant religion. And that has really changed a lot of the culture out of Scandinavia. So that's really important. And then again, I mentioned, roughly 100 years later after he died, and we had a new king, Gustaf and Adolf. He's called Lion of the North, and he was down there fighting the Germans about Christianity, right? Like the correct Christianity. And they won that war, Also massive impactful because Sweden was a big part of winning, and they conquered, as I mentioned, south of Germany, or I mean, north of Germany, I mean this part, south of Sweden, this part here. They conquered Pommern and so on, and that was very important because that made the Protestant religion, you know, kind of remain in Europe and spread and so on. So that really changed a lot of the religious and, you know, progressive values right in Europe. And it's probably a big part, again, speaking of, you know, commerce and innovation and so on in Europe, right? If Europe had stayed Catholic, I don't think Europe would have the same, you know, technical advances and so on, right? And maybe Europe would never really have, it's hard to imagine how it looked today, but I think that we would have way less technology, right? If Europe hadn't had all these religious wars during the 17th century then, with Sweden that was a massive part of, because they basically were the big winners of that war. So yeah, but we were basically the big ass winners of that war. But it's really important, not all that Sweden won, right, for the Swedish power or whatever, but they actually, by winning, Sweden protected all these German guys, right, mostly, but also other countries too, that wanted to have their religion, right? So by helping those people, we kind of, you know, establish that, okay, we're gonna have this religion now in Europe, you know. So it's very important in that way, right? Rather than just Sweden conquering a city in Germany, whatever, or taking over Burma and so on. That wasn't really like a massive thing, but so from a monetary standpoint, Sweden had this huge win done in Burma, where they conquered Prague and took Prague down here, where they conquered basically Prague and took all their money. Yeah, the classic thing that Sweden took all their Bibles and all these Giga Codex and all this, you know, gold and everything. It was like $100 billion value win there for Swedes in 30-year war, yeah. And the war then lasted for roughly 30 years, yeah. So it's a massive war, right? It's either called the 30-year war or the League Wars, but that's basically the religious war in Europe that really changed the European fate. And again, without Gustav Vasa, right, Sweden would have been on the Catholic side instead, and that would be very different, because then, so that's a massive difference, really massive thing. But anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe and have a great day.